Thank you, Madam Chairperson, for this very interesting intervention while inviting me to speak here. I'll obviously not, I don't have a text or I'm not as prepared as Advaita was. Therefore, because I have been continuously on the move. And one aspect like modernity and lifestyle, movement and continuous movement also affects process of thinking. So I have been in that phase for the last 10 days. I would therefore seek your indulgence to allow me to share a few thoughts. Charles Trevelyan in 1830s, in his book on the education for India, mentioned something rather interesting. He said that the new schools that we are putting up, they were then called seminaries, that the new seminaries that we are establishing, is doing one fundamental cardinal thing, and that is, it is instilling in the natives a desire, an ambition. And what was that desire and ambition? And this is what Charles Trevelyan, a colleague of Macaulay, says. The summit of their ambition, that they, the natives, is to become like us. I think that was the crux of the entire issue. If we reduce it, or if we bring it down, extrapolate it to the topic today, modernity versus lifestyle, what was ensured was a process of homogenization. Homogenization through that particular type of education ensured that whatever peculiar or particular characteristics a people, a race, or a civilization had was gradually steamrolled. So therefore, you had political hegemony leading to cultural homogenization. One of the fundamental aspects that any occupying power did was to destroy the traditions and systems of knowledge. Why? Because in those traditions and systems of knowledge remained alive our uniqueness, our difference, and our own worldview. The first step, therefore, of political hegemony was the destruction of knowledge dimensions and traditions. There's a very interesting thing that comes to my mind here, and that is, there's one point that Pandit Deendayal Upadhyay makes very clear. For us, modernization doesn't mean westernization. And it is very interesting that Deendayal Upadhyay spoke about this in 1965, and if we take the entire, go backward and take the entire gamut of our intellectual thinkers, our opinion makers, thought leaders, as I call them, everyone, starting from Swami Vivekananda down to Ananda Kumara Swami Sri Aurobindo, and even later, grappled with this challenge. The challenge of defining modernity in one's own civilizational context. Of course, Macaulay in his letter, not his minutes, in his letter to his father, 12th October 1836, makes it very clear that the education that we are imparting is making one thing certain, and that it is derooting. It is derooting the one who's exposed to it. It is derooting him from their own root, their cultural traditions, and from their civilizational worldview. There's a French word which is very apt It's called deracine, deracinated, derooted. Racine is root, and you get derooted. So the entire debate of lifestyle versus modernity, as Deen Dayal Upadhyaya very aptly says, he says, we are not archaeologists. We do not want to be the keepers of a museum. But at the same time, we wish to be open to the latest progress in thinking and in living that is taking place across the world, and this is something which is very unique to our thinkers. There was always this quest for alter modernity. While we were open, we were, like Mahatma famously said, I want to keep all windows open, but I don't want to be swept off my feet. Our thinkers were certain that we needed to be open to the evolution of thinking and of living all across the globe. But again, what was very unique about our thinkers, as Sri Aurobindo said, that we would like to take all that is coming from the world, but we want to do an Atmasat, make it uniquely ours, decide on whether we can make use of that in our condition, make it something uniquely Bharatiya, and then fit it into our system. Only then we accept it. So it's very interesting that perhaps it's only in our civilizational context that there was a continuous dialogue, a dialogue with modernity, an attempt to situate ourselves in the current context without getting deracinated. And luckily, Charles Trevelyan and Macaulay's dream did not come fully true, though there was this entire layer of Brown Sahibs who, as Professor Kapoor says it very interestingly, he says that what was lost for us was the sense of the adversary. Once we lost the sense of adversary, cultural colonization, or as K.C. Bhattacharya says, cultural colonization is more subtle because political colonization can be felt. Cultural colonization is not felt, and it is more subtle in nature because it affects your soul. It takes possession of your soul. So what I meant was that this entire debate on modernity versus lifestyle, I'm trying to just put that into a perspective because this is strictly speaking not my topic, but there was this intense, be it the national education movement, be it the national freedom movement, there was this huge dimension of thinking, of thought flow that continued with the political movement parallelly. And in that thought flow, you had literature, you had education, and you had this entire intensive thinking of trying to situate India in the world. There was no conflict. In our lifestyle, there's no concept of conflict. Or as Prime Minister Modi, in his book Convenient Action, beautifully puts it, we were perhaps the only civilization, perhaps no, were the only civilization, which was in tune with nature. There was no conflict between our lifestyle and nature, or there was no conflict between our lifestyle and what was modern at that point of time. And therefore, it was perhaps only we who talked about climate justice, who talked about environmental consciousness, and not only environmental regulation. Because regulation comes when there is conflict. Regulation has to take place when you are not in sync and when there is a certain amount of stress. These are certain things that came to my mind. For example, Sri Aurobindo, in his Indian Culture and External Influence, clearly states this. Swami Vivekananda, across his travels, in fact, when he went to the West, he adopted the ochre robe to suit to Western conditions. Swamiji himself, throughout his Western sojourn, beautifully blended himself with the surroundings that he was. And yet, in that total blending, in that total integration, all that he taught was Vedanta. And therefore, perhaps civilization in India is more in tune with adapting itself to the evolution that is taking place now, evolution at all fronts. Civilizational crisis has been repeatedly dogging the West. In that sense, there has been no civilizational crisis in India. But obviously, things keep changing. And there's a sentence that Advaita used. She talked about demise of traditional values. So I think this is the entire challenge. And I just remember Sri Aurobindo in his last public message, he talked about India developing as a great power. He talked about India achieving great status. But at the same time, he warned that India's Indianness, Bharatiyata, needed to be preserved. Because after all, he says, it would be a sad thing if India lost her Indianness and became just like any other nation. So I think the entire debate, which is an ongoing debate, because you see in the West, as you travel across cities in the West, you see a greater homogenization taking place. Differences and uniqueness of cultures are diluting. There is one spread that is visible. And there is a struggle. The entire debate in China today by some of the leading public intellectuals is how to evolve a particularly Chinese model of growth, a Chinese model of development, which is inspired by the Confucian values. So it's not that there's no intense debate going on. It's just that because it's not reported here, it doesn't mean debates are not going on. There's an intense debate that is going on all across the world. Some are succumbing quite fast, some refuse to succumb, but there is an unmistakable quest of trying to situate one's traditional, even the conservatives in UK, for example, the entire knowledge, inherited tradition. How does one deal with that? There's this entire conservative debate going on in UK, in United Kingdom. So it's very interesting that while this is going on, India, of course, has an increasing potential capacity to radiate some light, some direction. And we have had a number of ways that have been shown to us, and ways which are modern, which are not even in the past. In the last 60, 70 years, thinkers have come one after the other who have shown ways. One should have integrated them in the education system. One should have generated debate. So these are some of the points that I wanted to share. Perhaps it may have been disjointed, but I think it's very necessary for us to ideate, to understand the ideational dimension of this entire debate. Thank you so much.